Going live now. Just give it a couple seconds. I think some people have already joined. So welcome. Today I'm joined by Michael Rinko. We've been going back and forth on Palantir on Twitter. He's had some great takes, really been feeding me a lot of great information, Palantir news. But I know he's also involved in the crypto space. So I, of course, wanted to reach out to him and get his take on this newest announcement. So welcome to the channel, Michael. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Jackson. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so could you kind of just give a little bit of a background on what you've been working on in this space, and then we'll kick it on over to the Palantir topic.
Definitely. So it's actually kind of funny timing. So I graduated this past year, this past spring. And so I've been working full-time ever since at a small macro hedge fund as a crypto analyst. So I've been full-time in crypto for probably about a year and a half. And the timing was actually kind of funny. I got into crypto kind of full-time around the same time I really started to go deep on Palantir. So I've been in both communities ever since, so for about a year and a half each.
Yeah, that's great. So were you kind of expecting a crypto announcement out of Palantir, or when you saw the news, was this out of the blue? Like, I had been speculating with some input from others in the Palantir community that their software and their work with Foundry really could be a great platform for this sort of blockchain technology. But as someone involved in the space and also following this company, were you expecting this? Were you surprised by it? What do you think?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was expecting, but when I heard the announcement and when I started to think more about how they could enter the space and kind of what their value add to customers might be, the first couple of things I thought of was one, Peter Thiel's experience at PayPal. And from what I understand about PayPal, like the biggest challenge that they had in creating the company and just making it profitable was minimizing fraud, right? So like minimizing financial fraud, which is like a really big issue, because even a small amount can just destroy your margins when you're a fintech player. So I think PayPal built a bunch of kind of proprietary, sophisticated software that helped them, reduce fraud. And from what I understand about Palantir, Peter Thiel's kind of idea was, well, why don't we take, this pretty high level suite of technology that we apply to Palantir and apply it to, the intelligence community, the intelligence world for Western governments, for, specifically the US government. And that's kind of like how Palantir came to be. And bringing that all the way back to crypto, like crypto has similar challenges. So like in crypto, everything is anonymous and everything's public, which a lot of people don't fully understand. We could talk more about that in a second. But there's a ton of data that gets thrown off in crypto because everything is on chain, is publicly known, which is good and bad. Good because it allows governments, if they have the technology, to get a really fine-grained detail on kind of what's going on in the crypto space. But bad because it's hard to aggregate and make sense of like just reams of open source data. So when I think about it, like Palantir's announcement, they seem to focus more on like the KYC, AML, so know your customer, anti-money laundering piece of crypto. And for me, that's kind of where I see them really going after and helping government clients and then potentially even corporate clients just understand who they're dealing with in like this new crypto ecosystem.
Yeah, so that brings up an interesting discussion, which is what is the really alternative right now? Is it kind of developing your own solutions and kind of like making your own path, or is there other software, or is Palantir really kind of being the first to put together a platform for this?
Yeah, so I'd say the biggest player in the KYC AML space that I know of is Chainalysis. So it's funny, a lot of people in the crypto community are not big fans of Chainalysis because they're kind of known for being buddy-buddy with the government. But Chainalysis is basically just a way that traditionally the U.S., it's a company that the U.S. government has relied on to track money laundering and payment flows within the crypto ecosystem. So they're probably the biggest player in the space right now that I know of. I'm sure maybe there's some smaller companies that are still private that are also players as well.
Yeah, so when we talk about the offering, what actually got announced is just on the website. I'm just looking at it right now. It's not letting me share it for some reason, but I think everyone's seen it. So they talk anti-money laundering, fraud detection, gap business intelligence, and cross-chain analytics as kind of the 4 pillars here. So could you kind of break that down? These seem like a lot of different things. How do they come together for a singular offering?
Yeah, so I'll just walk through an example because I think that might be helpful, especially for people who aren't too familiar with the crypto space, because I know it gets really complicated and there's a lot of like crazy jargon. But so if you start with a Coinbase account and you have $100 in a Coinbase account, right? What Coinbase allows you to do is you can move that $100 from sitting in your Coinbase account to another wallet. And Coinbase's wallet is owned by Coinbase itself. So it's called non-custodial. But you can send that $100 from your Coinbase wallet to a wallet address that you own. And that wallet address you own isn't owned by any company. It's owned by you directly. So that'd be a custodial wallet. And then so that second wallet, that custodial wallet, is anonymous. It doesn't like have your name plastered on it. So when you're interacting with other people from that wallet address, no one knows really who you are. What they would have to do is then they'd have to say, well, who funded that wallet? And your Coinbase account obviously funded that wallet, and then bam, that's how they get your name. So the challenge in crypto is that second wallet that we talked about. That second wallet is what's making all your transactions and interactions in the crypto ecosystem. And other counterparties to that second wallet have no idea who you are, right? They'd have to run the software that would, tell them, go back in time and say, okay, who originally funded that wallet? It was Jackson's Coinbase account, right? So like the news media likes to say, oh, everything's anonymous in crypto. No one knows, like it's just, scammers and hackers and North Korea, right? Which is true. Yes, it does. The small portion of the transactions in crypto come from malicious sources, but the vast majority are legal. The challenge is just tracking the payment flows back to the original source. It's called onboarding to like the decentralized ecosystem. And I think that's where Palantir comes in. Like if you're a payment provider and you're that secondary wallet that we talked about, if you go to pay for a good or service from that wallet address, the merchant on the other side of that transaction needs to know who you are. So they need to track back all of your transactions or wallets back to that original Coinbase account and say, okay, Jackson is a US citizen. He hasn't committed any crimes. We're going to accept that payment. And Palantir potentially could offer the software that would allow merchants to do that analysis. Yeah.
So how much of this do you think Palantir already had, right? With Foundry just kind of Carp has talked about it being 400 plus products all into one. And now they're trying to move down market, downstream. We saw Foundry for Builders, which was more targeted at day zero companies, as they call them. And now we have this kind of spin-off, Foundry for Crypto. How much of because I've seen them talk about, like the anti-money laundering before. So how much of this do you think is actually new versus repurposing what they've already made with kind of like a rebranding, but also repackaging to make an actually useful platform and kind of target these companies that really would really be able to benefit from a better solution?
Well, first, let me give a quick shout out. I don't know if you saw my shirt. I'm rocking the Palantir merch.
Oh, nice.
Awesome shirt. I just got this recently. So that's your question. Like what interests me most about Palantir is I think the way that I understand it is their technology, their software is relatively general purpose. And what I mean by that is they've built this over however many years, 10, 15 years, they've built this like big piece of software that they started off with Gotham, applying it to government clients, trying to track down bad guys. And then they realized, well, if we just tweak a couple of things around the edges and, change a few things here and there, we could point this at corporate clients, right? And then what you've been talking about, I think you're spot on, is maybe if they slim it down or, again, make a couple of tweaks, they could, potentially open it up to individuals or smaller size companies. So I think what the crypto offering is just another example of like that general purpose type technology. They've built something over so many years that's really sophisticated and does its job really well, namely kind of data aggregation, making sense of disparate data sources. And now they're kind of in the process of just pointing that at different kind of end business types.
Yeah. So you said when you heard this news, you immediately thought of the announcement of the purchase of gold. So what do you mean by that, and why was that the first thing you had thought of after hearing this?
Yeah. So I feel like, again, like Palantir's really misunderstood, I think, in the traditional investment community. And part of the reason why is that their business as it stands right now predominantly leans towards the government contracts, which institutional investors tend to not like. Personally, for me, I like totally invert that. I love that. I think the government's like a super sticky customer, and the runway is massive with the government. And for me, like when I think about what are the most important kind of defense contractors in the world right now, you tend to think of like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, companies like that make like tanks, planes, guns, stuff like that. But I think like as we've seen, with China and Iran and Russia, like we're kind of in a new, people call it new Cold War, second Cold War, whatever you want to call it. But no guns, no shots have been fired. Instead, it's just software going back and forth. It's cyber. So personally, when I think of like what are the most important companies right now for a government when it comes to like potentially a war or some sort of conflict, I think Palantir. It's hard to make an argument that another company is as important to the government as Palantir. Yeah. So how that ties back to gold is when I saw them buy gold, I was thinking the first thing I thought of was in the event of some cataclysmic war with China, if China shuts down our power grid, right, or if we're in a full-on war with Russia, or something like that, like a terrible situation, what asset does Palantir have access to that they can monetize or that they can use to run their business? Because their business, their software is like critical infrastructure to the U.S. government, and they need to be able to confidently tell the U.S. government that we will be able to function, we'll be able to fund ourselves in the worst possible case scenario. And gold, I think, does that for them. I think it's actually a good solution for that. Like if the whole banking system is off, they could use their gold bars, right, and like sell them. So that's what I thought of, and I think crypto ties into that because, again, if the traditional banking system's down, they could potentially, leverage some of the unique properties of Bitcoin or, different cryptocurrencies and facilitate payments, and maintain uptime for their software for the U.S. government.
So what's your response when you hear, and that was a very good point, actually. What is your response when you hear, doesn't this centralize any sort of blockchain kind of operations though, right? If you're kind of relying on another company, I'm not too sure, but yeah. So like, how do you kind of think of this centralization versus decentralization? Like, how do you respond to that?
Yeah. So that's a huge argument point in the crypto community. People are very passionate about decentralization, and rightfully so. So the way that I think about it is it's there's like people have talked about for like many years now, like, oh, like the U.S. government could just shut down Bitcoin if they wanted to. You know what I mean? Like once Bitcoin gets too big, like the U.S. government's just going to kill it, right? And I think, well, first off, that's just totally wrong. And people that say that fundamentally just don't understand how blockchains work. A blockchain is kind of like another layer of the internet. It's just, you could think of it kind of like as the new internet. And to shut down the internet, you'd need to shut down every single computer that's all interacting with the internet. The internet doesn't live in one centralized place. It's a decentralized network, and that's exactly what the Bitcoin network is. You to shut down Bitcoin, you'd have to literally shut down every node in the network, and Palantir would just be another node in that network. They would maybe set up a mining rig or some sort of validating node, and then they would read all of the transactions that are coming through the network. They could run their software on that, and then deliver intelligence solutions to whoever their customers will end up being. So I don't think that Palantir coming into the space would make it any centralized in any way.
Yeah. So do you think then, and this has been speculated on since they talked about it on the earnings call a few quarters back, about when Tesla and other companies were adopting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Do you think this announcement now is it's imminent that they're going to do something with it, right? Because they talked about how they'll accept Bitcoin as payment and they'll consider adopting it in the future. And we've had this announcement. The earnings call is a little over a week away. Do you think they've done anything like that? And I understand this is pure speculation, but it's fun to think about.
Yeah. So first off, I have no idea. So this is, to your point, this is total speculation. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if they put Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Like I'm almost expecting it at this point that they will, at some point in the future. I don't know when. But to me, gold was like the first kind of half step in that direction, because I think the way Palantir thinks about it is just like I was saying earlier. They need to be able to function and deliver their software to their government clients and also their corporate clients in the worst possible scenario, which would probably be some sort of like all-out war. And to be able to do that, they need to fund the business. They need to be able to have a diversified set of assets that performs well, or at least holds their value in that kind of worst case scenario. And gold is a great example. Gold's kind of like this historical, inflation hedge. It generally holds its value over time. And it's uncorrelated with pretty much everything else, every other type of asset out there. And Bitcoin actually has a lot of those same properties. And Bitcoin would probably offer them a lot more upside than gold. So it's a little bit more speculative. But then the other thing, so aside from that, I think a purchase of Bitcoin would probably be a great marketing tool for them, because they could say, hey guys, we just bought Bitcoin, and by the way, we have Foundry for crypto, right? So it's kind of easy free marketing. And it would endear them certainly to the crypto community, who always appreciates corporate purchases.
Yeah, and I think I now just realized, forgot to give the disclaimer up front. Want to be very clear that we are just speculating here. This is for entertainment purposes, as you always hear, and none of this should be taken as financial advice of any kind. But I did want to ask, you had an interesting take on, since you were just saying, and everyone knows, Palantir works so closely with the U.S. government. What does this mean for, if anything, the U.S. government's take on crypto? Is this kind of, as you were saying, like, we can't shut it off, and we're going to let Palantir, or we're not going to fight back against Palantir kind of going into this space? Or because you would assume, right, that if the U.S. government was so strongly against crypto and this company they're working with, that they have lots of contracts with, they would say, no, we don't really want you to get into this. So just kind of explain that take, because I think it's a very good one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of like the most fascinating angles about this recent announcement. And just like you said, Jackson, Palantir's business with the U.S. government is its number one priority. I think probably most investors realize that. So every decision that Palantir makes outside its core customer being, which is the U.S. government, it makes with the U.S. government in mind, right? So like, I guess an example of this is Palantir isn't going to offer their software to China because the U.S. government would be unhappy with that, right?
Yeah.
You know, in the same vein, Palantir isn't going to start interacting with crypto or crypto companies if the U.S. government isn't happy with that. So I think, you know, for me, like I pay attention to crypto. I think it's been relatively obvious for pretty much most of this year that the U.S. government wasn't going to ban it or wasn't going to go after crypto. Is actually kind of slowly warming up to it, slowly adopting it. I think that, you know, the biggest kind of watershed moment was the Bitcoin ETF, the futures ETF, which I think went live last week, a couple weeks ago now. That was like the first sign that like the United States, the U.S. government was saying, okay, we're going to bring crypto, Bitcoin we're going to institutionalize it. We're going to basically concede that it's here to stay, that we're not going to try and ban it. And I think the Palantir announcement is just another sign that the U.S. government is now interested in kind of working alongside this emerging technology and not trying to kill it.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of moving on, and I guess I forgot to do these banners before, but one of the things you thought would be good to talk about is the future implications for this. And I know we've covered some of that, but kind of how do you see this going? They have this program out. I think Elementis, I'm not sure you're aware of Elementis, right?
No.
So, well, I'm not super, I don't know, I haven't looked very much into them, but it is a company that Palantir was working with on the Foundry for Builders, actually second iteration of the alumni program. So they're already working. So it's an alumni company. So someone from Palantir had this startup, and they wanted to come back and use Foundry. So I think, anyway, that's a long way of saying I think they're going to be one of the first, and this is the speculation, to use Foundry for crypto. So
is Elementis a crypto company?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I should have done more research, but yeah, that was what everyone was kind of saying, right? Is that we would have kind of like we've seen with Foundry for Builders, maybe cohorts or something, because as far as I can tell, this is not an open platform just yet. Foundry for Builders, I'm guessing, because they're using the same naming convention, it's going to follow a similar kind of pathway where they'll get some clients that they'll work closely with, probably alumni, although I'm not sure they even have that many alumni that are doing this sort of thing. So we'll see, but yeah, what sort of future implications do you think this has? Probably, of course, not immediately on the financials of the business, but if they're able to ramp this program up, do you see any future implications? Like what's the big deal? What's the reason to care? Is it that the software is going to power these businesses and they're going to grow with the network effects and that'll trickle back down to Palantir, or is there something else?
Yeah, definitely. So I think for me, like I try and take a big picture view. Again, like disclosure, this not investment advice, totally my personal opinion, not my employer's. But I think crypto is going to keep growing. It's going to have an important role in all of our lives moving forward. And I think, the people at Palantir probably agree with that and, would like a slice of that growth. And the way that I think they're thinking about it right now is just what we were talking about earlier. It's how to provide existing solutions that they're already providing and kind of port them over to the crypto world. And I think the most obvious one is KYC AML. So if you're Amazon, right? If Amazon wants to start accepting crypto tomorrow, they need a software solution that can check every single transaction. Anyone who wants to buy, whatever they're buying on Amazon with Bitcoin, they need to make sure that Bitcoin isn't owned by North Korea, Iran, some hacker, some criminal. You know what I mean? And that's where Palantir can come in. They can come in at the point of sale and they could track back that Bitcoin, whatever crypto is in question, track it back over its history and try and analyze who is that person that's making that purchase, and is it a legitimate purchase? I think that's like the first kind of beachhead for Palantir, and then from there, it's a totally speculative as to like where they go from there. But I think that narrow, probably sounds boring to most people, KYC AML, but that's a huge issue in crypto right now. And a massive market, I think, now, and will only grow moving forward.
Yeah. So how would you begin to sort of value this? I love the TAM metric, which for those unaware is total addressable market, which is kind of like this is the maximum we could possibly capture annually. So as you're saying yourself, obviously very much a growing industry, very much at the beginning, but what sort of value do you think Palantir is kind of looking, saying into the future, this is kind of what we're trying to capture? As you're just saying, there's a lot out there, but how would you begin to even put a number on that? Is that even possible? Because I've gotten asked this, so I wanted to ask you.
Yeah. I think that's a tough question to answer, just because we really don't know. We haven't gotten a whole lot of detail from Palantir on what they're looking to do. But if we just assume for now that it's kind of like a KYC AML focused solution, I think that still could be a really lucrative business line for Palantir. And I just look at Chainalysis. I should have looked it up, what they were most recently valued at. But it's in the billions. I think it might be over 5 billion. I could be off. But I look at Chainalysis as their main competitor, and I think Palantir's, starting off a little bit late. Chainalysis has been running for a few years, but Palantir has the benefit of its, massive software package with Foundry, and it's really talented engineers. So I'd look at Chainalysis as its main competitor in the space, and kind of comp the relative valuation off that.
Interesting. So it does look like $4.2 billion. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure when the most recent round was, but I'm putting the name in the live chat here, so anyone else can look into it. But that's interesting because we really haven't had competitors to Palantir for Foundry, right? Because Foundry is kind of this all-inclusive, everything we could possibly put together since the company started, take on building for the enterprise. But now as they kind of pick a niche and do that multiple times, as you're saying, there are people out there are companies that are already working on this. So how can they, I guess, like, what's the deal with the competition when they, whether it's here or elsewhere, when they niche down? Like, what are your thoughts? How could they? Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like.
So I think the way that I think about this, because this is one of the challenges in understanding, Palantir, period, is Palantir is kind of focused on like the core issues that its clients face, governments and corporations, and frankly, governments and corporations face kind of the same problems, just in different ways. And Alex Karp, you ran the one of your more recent videos. It was Alex Karp's, I think it was like address to employees or whatever, where he talked about what separates Palantir from other companies, and he was kind of making fun of other companies and saying they would have split Gotham or Foundry up into like 20 different products and been selling each individual product, which is true, right? Like that's what a lot of these SaaS companies do, is they create a product and then like split it up across 7 different teams, have like 150 different salespeople selling, all these broken up products, and the products don't talk to each other. They're kind of siloed. The engineers working on them are siloed. You know what I mean? So it's not this like big one cohesive package, general purpose, maybe technology that's being offered. It's all these little niche solutions that the company can, sell individually and probably make more money than Palantir is making right now. But they're not actually providing like a long-term solution, long-term value to their client. Palantir kind of inverts that and says, well, what if we package everything together and try and like answer and solve the core questions that companies face, right? And Karp has talked about this in the past. How do we protect privacy while extracting the maximum amount of information, about what, for governments, it's bad guys, enemies. For corporations, it's maybe criminals or just past credit history, more harmless things. How do we provide those solutions while protecting privacy, while solving other problems that companies face? And I think that's where like the real value add of Foundry is. So when I think about Palantir coming over to crypto, I think about it in a similar way, right? Like maybe a Chainalysis has a better crypto tracking tool as it stands right now than Palantir does. I wouldn't be surprised that they have a head start. They've been doing this for a while. But I think what Palantir offers is it offers a suite of solutions that a Chainalysis, which is kind of more narrowly focused, just doesn't have. And I think as a individual Palantir investor, that's what I value is the fact that they're in it for the long run and they're not trying to take short-term profits now. They're reinvesting them. And they're really trying to, as Karp always says, be the operating system for these enterprises.
Yeah, great point. Thank you for that clarification. So another thought I just had, right, is so there are these crypto companies, you kind of sell them on Foundry for crypto, but what if you're able to kind of upscale over time and deliver and, I don't know, like upsell more of Foundry, right? Like operations or whatever. Like I know because the crypto is like its own thing. That's like the core of the business. But then kind of on the enterprise side, like do you think there's room for upselling more of these smaller packages that are part of Foundry?
Yeah. So, and I could be off base here, but the way that I think about like what a Palantir offers to its clients is that, and we've heard Karp and on some of the earnings calls, they've talked about this as kind of the trend that they've seen is they'll go in and they'll solve one problem for companies, right? Data management or something boring, right? And then once Palantir kind of has its teeth into the company, they'll start to look around and try and solve other problems that they're facing, right? Once the forward deployed engineers, are working with the management team. And then over time, what Palantir finds is that Foundry is being applied to more and more areas of the business naturally, because you could just point it at different, problem sets. So they don't even need to necessarily upsell it. I think that happens naturally. They see how much value they're extracting in this one silo of their business and say, well, why can't, Foundry run all of our business units? And I think that's, the potential for Foundry.
Yeah. So in the interview, I don't know if you saw, it was the head of Foundry for Builders. I saw that release yesterday, so I did a little reaction. But she was basically saying that there are some companies that use Foundry for the front end, some that use it for the back end kind of deal, and some even more that actually just use it for the entire operating system for the business, right? So we want to see, as investors, we want to see more of that. What's stopping companies from using it across the entire business? And I think, it'll be interesting to see if that's even possible with these smaller end companies until kind of the entire, until the entire offering moves down, right? Because I'm not sure how complete Foundry for Builders is. And Foundry for crypto seems like even more of a specialized solution. So I don't know if it has like the full power of Foundry, but I guess that remains to be seen. I hope they talk. Do you think they'll highlight this obviously on the earnings call?
They might. Yeah, they might. I mean, it's crypto's hot right now. It's kind of a sexy thing to talk about on an earnings call. I'm sure investors would love to hear about it. So they definitely might. I think you make a great point though, and I've really, really liked your videos on Foundry for Builders, because I think investors are totally kind of missing the point on that, and you've hit it right on the head. I think about it a little bit differently. I think the Foundry for Builders program is perfect for Palantir, because when you deal with a big developed company, there's a lot of resistance to applying a software solution, especially like Palantir, that kind of comes in, like takes over the whole operating system, right? It's a lot easier to kind of slap on like a Band-Aid software solution, right? That does kind of a little task, and you don't have to fundamentally rework how the business is run. With Palantir, you are kind of like reworking a little bit of how the entire business is run. It's run through Foundry as opposed to through whatever its myriad of existing solutions is. But Palantir probably faces a lot of resistance at some of these larger clients that they have. But with Foundry for Builders, these guys are just trying to survive. You know what I mean? They're trying to bring a new product to market. And as we've heard from Palantir, Foundry allows them to accelerate that growth and that development. So they're natural consumers of Foundry's entire suite of products. They're leveraging everything Foundry offers, whereas some of these bigger guys are probably only using a piece of what Foundry can offer. And I think that's the real promise of Foundry for Builders, is that's really where we're going to see whether Palantir is truly, as Karp says, like the best software company in the world. I think we'll see it first through Foundry for Builders.
Yeah, very interesting. I just don't know like how they're delivering it, if it's literally the same means of delivery, because I don't think they're using the forward deployed engineers for these smaller programs. So I don't know if that has any implication on what they're able to provide. I think as I understand it, the forward deployed engineers are more for the sort of customization and getting like an entire organization set up, which you probably don't need as much for these startups or SPACs or whatever they may be. But I really hope, I'm assuming they will be talking about this on the call. I think they're probably going to do some sort of marketing pitch on it, as they have done with new announcements that have come before the earnings before. So I wonder, do you think there'll be any institutional questions on it, or what are you expecting?
Yeah, there might be. I'm not sure. I mean, institutions tend to focus more on like kind of blander stuff, I guess, to us retail investors, like what the earnings are, what they're projecting revenue out as next quarter, and less so kind of the flashier areas of the business. But I mean, I think there definitely could be a question on like where they see crypto going, and kind of how they think Foundry can kind of enter the marketplace.
So have you heard any, like, being in the space, would you have known about this announcement had you not been following Palantir? Because I haven't seen like any really news about it.
Yeah, no, I did not know this was coming. I was as surprised as everyone else.
No. I'm saying, like, even once the announcement was made, did you hear about it?
Yeah, well, yeah, like I saw it. I think I saw it first on Twitter, actually. But yeah, I definitely saw the news breaking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was wondering, because I didn't see any like news, like any real coverage. Media is kind of what I was getting at. But yeah, it would be interesting to see. So any other thoughts on kind of this whole deal? I think we covered a lot of the crypto. I mean, well, for Palantir at least, it's kind of up in the air still in terms of what they're going to share with us. What would you ask Palantir if you had the chance? Unfortunately, the announcement came after I had already posted my 3 questions on Say Technologies. But yeah, what would you be asking Palantir management if you could, and what do you need to learn more about to be even more excited as an investor?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I was super fascinated just by the purchase of gold, which I know probably people are bored by, but I thought that was really interesting, because that was just like Palantir, like, has historically zigged where others have zagged. They kind of pride themselves on being a little bit out of the box and unorthodox, and that's purchasing gold is just another example of that. But as an investor, like a lot of other investors think about gold and Bitcoin very similarly. Like Bitcoin is kind of considered digital gold. And I think it'd be a natural next step for them to potentially add Bitcoin to the balance sheet. So I'd love to hear first off, why did they buy gold? What was their thought process behind that? And I think we could maybe derive some, interesting insights from that answer and try and think about what, whether or not they might add Bitcoin going forward, because I see it as kind of a natural next step. That would be one. And then two, I'd love to hear about Foundry for Builders, which I know you're super interested in as well. I think that's a huge growth area, something that's kind of undefined as of right now, or still a little undefined. They've put out a few videos on that, but the more we can learn about that, I think the better. And then the last one, I think the crypto space is fascinating, and I'd like to hear how they're thinking about that. Like my kind of knee-jerk reaction was they're just going to go strictly after KYC AML for now. That's kind of their bread and butter. And then from there, you know what I mean? Once they're providing that solutions to companies, just like, we previously talked about, then they could, start to expand Foundry out to maybe offer other solutions for that same business. But I think the primary issue that people have is a lot of people are looking at crypto right now and saying, holy smokes, this is a $2 trillion asset class. There's a ton of wealth being created. Everyone's talking about it. How do we get a piece of that growth? And I think the issue that a lot of non-crypto companies have is if they accept crypto as a payment, they need to understand where that asset is coming from. And I think that narrow solution is exactly kind of what Foundry was built for. So I think that's kind of the first area they attack, but I'd love to hear management maybe give some color on where else they see the product heading.
Yeah, that's very interesting on kind of just getting in, like getting a foot in the door and then kind of building after that. But I was also just thinking, I saw on the Chainalysis, they have, I think, 300 employees. I can't imagine that Palantir has, well, I know like in total, they far exceed that. But for this project, the resources that they're putting towards Foundry for Crypto probably is not larger than that, but it's because they're kind of getting leverage on the full product suite, kind of as you were saying, with Foundry as a whole. So I wonder if kind of new avenues like builders, like crypto, and no doubt there are future ones to come, really can kind of show the leverage of building the product up front and starting at a higher end and then moving down market, as we've seen some of the most successful companies do, if that really comes into play. And yeah, I've been kind of shocked that investors just kind of ignore, at least the institutional ones, kind of ignore builders, when I think it's probably the biggest, most important program the company is running right now. So,
Totally. I think you're the only one that I've seen really highlight that. I think that's a credit to you. But yeah, I think institutional investors are totally missing kind of the big picture of Palantir.
Yeah. Well,
the last thing I'll mention is I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of retail investors that are interested in Palantir are coming over from the Tesla community. I'm not surprised by that at all. And kind of the relationship I draw between the two is Tesla has kind of shown the world. It's been like the biggest example of what you can do with like big data collection, how you can monetize the ability to collect like huge amounts of data. So like in my opinion, Tesla's, years and years ahead of the next competitor when it comes to autonomous driving. And the way that they've done that is just collect more data than anyone else. It's, relatively simple. There's a lot of other complications, but basically the race is who can collect the most data, make sense of, driving data and feed it into a machine learning algorithm that will produce, some sort of AI intelligence that will drive a car, right? That's kind of the fundamental problem that Tesla's trying to solve. For Palantir, they're trying to solve how can a government protect its people while protecting privacy, and then on the corporate side, how can companies run their business while protecting against COVID, hackers, all sorts of problems. And the way that Palantir does that is by collecting huge amounts of data. So the U.S. government is the biggest company in the world, right? So the U.S. government has more data than any other company in the world, right? It's the biggest one. So that's a natural advantage that Palantir has that I don't see like any institutional investors talking about. They're collecting huge amounts of data with their work with the U.S. Army, some of the intelligence services that they work for, and they're feeding that through their software, which is basically making it smarter, making it better. And then they're using that same, improved software and pointing it at different end customers. You know what I mean? So Foundry for Builders is benefiting from all the data that they've collected on the government side of the business. Crypto is just another avenue, another end market that they could point their solution at. And it's just a huge flywheel to me. And it's a like built-in advantage, I think, that Palantir has over a lot of these other software providers.
Yeah. And I don't know, you're just saying like data wins the self-driving race, which I've been following Tesla for a few years now. And it's kind of funny, like the company really with the most data, right, is Google. And they were trying to do Waymo. And I don't know why they couldn't figure that out, but they were paying their engineers to just drive a couple miles and and they lost pretty quickly, I'd say. But
I totally agree.
I think the longer it takes for that to become clear, though, with Palantir, I don't know. What do you think about the opportunity? Because like if the stock isn't rising, right, then you're not really getting any positive feedback on your thesis, right? So obviously, not investment advice, but how do you kind of stick to your thesis, and how do you kind of make sure the company's actually on the right path when maybe the stock isn't going in the right direction?
I think that's a great question, because it's hard. It's hard to maintain conviction, especially when the stock is trading sideways or down, as it has. But what I always try and do is I just try and zoom out. So I develop like a kind of like a core thesis, kind of like what I just outlined, and then I try and find like different. I'm always thinking about how can I disprove myself? How can I disprove that thesis that I had. And one of the warning signs, I think, for me that I have focused on and will continue to focus on is churn. So like whether or not people are using Foundry and then leaving once they've tried it. You know what I mean? That's a huge red flag to me, right? Yeah. Because that means that it's not providing any value add for them. They're not getting anything out of Foundry. So that would be an issue, obviously. But we're not seeing that at all. We're seeing like basically zero churn, especially on the government side. Once these government agencies work with Gotham, no one leaves. If anything, they're just expanding it, and Palantir is slowly charging more and more as each year goes on. You know what I mean? So if that were to change, though, if churn were to go up, if maybe on the Foundry for Builders, if a bunch of these companies use it and then stop using Foundry, that's an issue. But until I see that, like I'm going to stick with my investment. And then the other thing that I throw out is Tesla. You know what I mean? If you look at the chart of Tesla, it went sideways for years. It just traded flat. And part of that had nothing to do with the fundamentals of the business. They were iterating. They were improving the entire time that the stock was trading flat. It was just institutional investors just weren't understanding that, weren't seeing that. And I think as retail guys, we need to understand that it's going to take big money flooding into PLTR, for the stock price to go up. And until that happens, we're going to be trading flat. I don't know when that will happen, but I think the issue that we're all dealing with right now is institutional investors just have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to Palantir. They don't know what the company does and don't understand it, I think, on the level that we do.
Yeah. I was thinking about doing a video because on Palantir's, I think, investor relations site, they list all of the analysts that actually cover the stock. So I was thinking about maybe doing a deep dive and try and compile like all of what they've said and see if it's been right at all, because I don't follow too much. I only see what headlines or actual videos that get posted, but I think that would be interesting. And then I'm kind of waiting to see the earnings estimates for this quarter. Not that relates to this discussion, but kind of, I think it's been a serious trend with Palantir management under promising for literally every quarter. So I wonder if Wall Street's going to catch on to that. But But yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much, Michael. Do you have any closing thoughts, or do you want to just share how people can follow you? Let me just take this this banner down. It's just for your Twitter. It's just your name, right?
Yeah, Michael Rinka, my full name.
Yeah.
So I mostly tweet about crypto. It's kind of my company account. But maybe I'll start throwing out some Palantir content. I got to check with my boss on that first.
Yeah, yeah. No, don't jeopardize anything. But this has been great. Super helpful for me to get an understanding on what's important for Foundry for Crypto, kind of what they're going after first. Again, we're kind of from the outside looking in on this, but to get a sense of what the big deal is here. We have a name on the competitor, so thank you for that. Everyone always asks, they're like, "Who is Palantir's competitor?" But it doesn't, so they're not a public company. It doesn't look like.
They're still private.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Well, yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind words, and thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, Jackson. It's been awesome following the channel. I've learned a ton from you, and I'm looking forward to staying engaged with the Palantir community going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, and to everyone else for joining on a Saturday morning. So we will see you next time.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Michael.
See ya.